Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'll be covering, lighting the scene from scratch. In my previous videos, I covered different options you have with area lights, and different techniques you can do using, like setting up your object as camera, or using the tool, lighting tool that you see here. So in this video, I'll be using area lights to light up the scene from scratch, and I will be rendering each light in picture viewer so we can compare and see how the scene changed based on each light. In my render settings, I have my render set to physical, and in my options, I turned off default light, so when I hit render, I get a black screen. And so yeah, let's just jump in and get started. And yeah, I also have the backdrop and the three basic objects, cube, and the two spheres on top. And also I have my camera set up like this, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be showing lighting, so you can probably set up your own scene the way you want it to. It's really a personal choice. Anyway, so let's create our first light. So let me just do area light, and let's bring down the size. I go to our details tab, put it to maybe 100 by 100, and also change the fall off to inverse square, something like this. Bring down the radius, something like this, and let's move it up so we can actually see what's going on. Okay, so this is going to be our main light for the scene. With the first light, or the main light, all you want to do is create a mood. So if you're going for something, scary, dark, maybe play with the color a little bit, go to your general, set it to, red, something like this. Try to get a nice angle and a nice shadows going. Also, let's enable the shadows, don't forget that. Set it to area shadows. Yeah, let's set the object as camera so we can decide what kind of look we want to go after. So we have our camera set to the left of the object. So let's maybe do something like this. Give it like a side light for the first one. Maybe kind of like from under. Something like this. And let's go back to our default camera. And let's see what we did. Okay, so this is going to be our first light, or our main light. And then we're going to add 2 more, or 3 or 4, depending on how the scene looks. So let me just jump in the camera and give it a render and see what we got for the first light. Alright guys, so the render just finished, and this is our first light, and this is the result we got. So we set the light to the right of the object, and we're really setting up the mood right here. I like the lighting so far. So the next thing you want to do is fill in the shadows in the back of the object, because right now you have the main light going, really nice, but you kind of lose your object here, and the shadows is really it's kind of too dark. So the next thing is to create the key light, or the fill light, and fill in the shadows in the back of the object. So let me just close the picture viewer and jump out the camera. So we have our first light, as you can see here, set to the right. So let's do our second light. Create your light one more time, area light. And for this one, let's change the shape, disc instead of rectangular. And also enable fall off, like always. And shadows as well, set to area. So this is what we have so far. Let's set the active object as camera, and so we can position our light better. Zoom out a little bit so we can see where we are. So our goal was to fill in the shadows in the back, because we have our main light to the right. So what we want to do is fill in those shadows in the back, or the left of the object. So maybe something like this. But obviously right now it's way too bright. So let's just jump out to our default camera and play around with the radius. As you see here, it's kind of going way past the background. So let's bring it way up or down, something like this. And the light is kind of huge, So let's bring down the size as well to maybe 50 and 50. And let's play around with the radius more so we can get an idea of what's going on. So as you can see, guys, we had something like this before, really dark. And all we want to do is fill in those shadows just a little bit so we can see what's going on the left of our object. So maybe something like this would work. And also later we're going to add global illumination as well to see what it's going to do for us, you know, the bounces of light on the scene. Oops. Okay, so let's jump back into the camera, the main camera, and give it a render and see what kind of result we got. And we can compare the first light and the fill light in our picture viewer. So let me just give it a render. Alright guys, so the render just finished with our fill light or our secondary light. So let's just compare the two. So what we had before is something like this. The lighting in the mood was nice. And we added our secondary light to the left to fill in the shadows. As you can see here, this is what happened. We're getting nice speculars and fill in the shadows on the left of the objects. But it's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to tone it down just a bit. And then we're going to add one more light behind the objects to fill in you know, the background a little bit. So let me just close this. Go to our secondary light. Let's rename it second light. Second. And let's tone it down just a tiny bit. So let's set the intensity maybe to 80 because I really like the mood with the first light, so I don't want to lose the mood, so I'm going to tone it down. And let's just jump out the camera. And so what we have so far is our main light to the right, secondary light to the left. So let's add one more light, maybe like a overhead light or a behind the object's light. So let's do one more time. Add a new area light. For this one, I'm going to increase the size a little bit. It's going to be our overhead light, like a panel of light. So maybe 400 by 400. Something like this. And let's jump into the object as camera mode and play around and set up our lighting. So let me just zoom out, see where I am here. Oh, I'm under the background. Okay, so we have our main light to the right, secondary light to the left, and this is going to be our overhead light that's going to fill in the back of the object or the background. So maybe something like this. And we don't need it to be that strong, and also we can play around with the color. So let's set this one to maybe yellowish and really tone it down a little bit, maybe 50%. Maybe something like this. Okay, let's jump back to main camera or the default camera. So what we got so far is main light to the right, secondary light to the left, and we have this huge overhead light. So let's just give it a render and compare the three, and then we can add more lights and control the specs and diffuse and add it where we need it to. So let's just give a render for this one and see what kind of change we got with the third light. Alright guys, so the render just finished. So let's compare our three lights that we added one by one. So we started with something like this, our main light. It was set to the right of the object. Then we added our fill light, or our secondary light, to the left to fill in the shadows, on the back of the object kind of. And then this is the result with the third light. We really filling in those shadows in the back, and we're getting nice and even gradient. But I think the third light can be toned down a little bit, and also the secondary light toned down a little bit so we can get that mood that we set up in the beginning. So let's do that next, and also let's add maybe two more lights to control the speculars, and I'll show you how to do that next. So let's do that. So for the third light, this one right here that we added last, third light, let's rename it. Let's tone down the brightness or the intensity to maybe something like 20%. And also the secondary light, let's tone it down even more because I really like the mood we set up with the first light. And let's change the color to light blue, just to keep it different. So for this one, we're gonna add one more light, but this light is gonna be acting only, only affecting speculars. And I want to add like a red specular to the eyes of the sphere, or like a, or this looks to me like a monster, so I want to add like, weird speculars to the eyes and make them red. So what I'm going to do is add one more light, area light. I'm going to rename it spec 1, and it's going to be only for speculars. And the way you do that is you scroll down and you tick off diffuse so it doesn't affect diffuse, and you keep the speculars checked on. Okay, so let's change the shape to something else, maybe maybe a sphere for this one instead of a rectangle. And let's turn on inverse square for the fall off, and let's jump into camera mode or as object, and let's see what we can do here. Let's zoom out, and what we want to do is bring in those specs, something like this. As you can see, these are the specs we're getting, and it's not affecting any diffuse. So let's just do something a little bit weird, maybe like this. And don't forget to change the color to red, or it can be anything you want. But I just want to make it like scary a little bit, maybe something like this. So let's go back to our default camera, and you see we're getting a nice spec on the objects here. But as you can see on the floor, we're getting a weird specular as well. So the way to fix that is go to your project tab and drag in your floor to exclude it from the light, so it doesn't affect the floor, only affects the objects. So just drag in your subdivision surface or your floor, and bam, the specular disappears. Everything else looks fine. So let's jump back to the camera and give it a render and see what it looks like. Alright guys, so the render just finished for a spec light only. So let's compare and see what we did from the first one. So this was our main light coming from the right. Then we have our secondary light filling in those shadows here. Then we have our backlight that we added, our third light. And this is our spec only light, and we're getting that mood that I had with the first light back. As you can see, we kind of lost it, but then I toned down my secondary and third light, and I added the spec only light, and it's given us these weird artifacts, but that's because the shape of the light is spherical. So we'll change that, and for the last step I'll show you how to add global illumination and ambient occlusion to make your images pretty. So let's just jump in. So for the spec light only, we'll change the shape to back to maybe a disc instead of being a sphere, because it was bouncing around way too much. And let's just jump out. Let's add global illumination to our scene. So effects, global illumination, and what it's going to do is every light in your scene will bounce and pretty much give you a brighter result, fill in the shadows even more, and give you a nice gradient on your objects. So for the first one, for the primary method, we'll use yeah, we can use either one, but I'll probably go with this one. And for the secondary, I'll do the lighting map, and I'll set the balances to the 5000 should be fine. And let's add ambient occlusion as well. And let's increase or decrease the radius to maybe 50. I don't want it to be too black, so I'll just put it maybe to mid-gray, and we'll get a nice contact shadows as well from ambient occlusion. Okay, and yeah, that's about it. So let me give it one more render, and then we can compare all the different renders we did. So a few things to keep in mind when working with lights. You have full control here in your general tab if you want it to affect only the diffuse or only the speculars. That's one thing. If you have a problem with that, you can always turn off your diffuser specs and get a full control of where the light is landing. The next thing is the project tab. Just like if your floor is blown out with your main light, you can always drag in the floor into your project tab and exclude it from the overall lighting, and then add another lighting just for the floor, and so on. I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless. You have full control. So with the project tab, you can exclude and include the objects, and with the general tab, you can control the diffuse and spec, and so on, and different bounces. And so let me just give it one more last render, and we'll see what kind of result we created with 4 lights, or actually 3 lights and 1 spec light. Alright guys, so the render just finished. This is when we added, global illumination, ambient occlusion, and tweaked our lights a little bit, and this is the result we got. So let's just go back to our first light. So this was our main light, and it gave us, the main contrast kind of, and set up the mood for us. And then we try to fill in the shadow to the left. So we added the second light here, and this is the result we got. And then we added our backlight, or the overhead light, and then we were playing around with speculars and also tweaking our lights. And for the last result, this is the global illumination and ambient occlusion. And yeah, this is pretty much how you work with lights. As you can see, you keep adding, you keep tweaking, and the end result always looks nice. And if you're really concerned about the specular on the wall here, you can always bring it into Photoshop and Photoshop it out, or you can go back to your lights and the control the specular only or the diffuse only, and make sure it's not affecting your background. So you have full control of how you want to do this. This is just one way, and obviously you can come up with your own strategy and take your time and add light one at a time and really get full control of your lighting scene. Anyway guys, hopefully this video helped you. Please leave it a like, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in my next video guys. Have a good day. Bye.